Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering creativity. I'm Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Tod Williams, who is the founding partner of Tod Williams, Billie, Tsien Architects. Tod, welcome to the show.
So happy to be part of it. Thanks, Aaron. That's great.
Well, I am so excited to talk with you. Obviously, you are, one of the leading architects, especially of music venues in our country and or even around the world. And you are working on music halls, massive new expansion, which is so exciting here in Detroit. Music Hall, one of our great creative partners. So, which I want to talk about in just a second. But I thought if we could just start, there are so many in our audience whose lives are spent in and around music venues. But I think maybe potentially all too often, we don't actually think about the architecture that went into them. So I was curious, kind of, are there any aspects that you would want, those of us who are always in and around these venues, like, here are key things that we think about as we're literally creating these spaces, as we build them out of thin air and or take ideas and literally realize them in a concrete way. Any things you could kind of just share about what goes into the architecture of a music venue?
Well, I've always believed that it's making it like a home. I mean, that is that music exists at first in your life in your home, and the home has all of the ingredients of home. I liken it to, I don't know, Aaron, whether you realize that I lived in Carnegie Hall for 35 years. When I came to New York, I chose that the center of the universe, which I could live in, was Carnegie Hall. And I moved in there, and I then lived for 35 years until they got rid of all of the tenants. So what I experienced in Carnegie Hall was it was life. Billie and my son was born there. He was the only child at that time growing up in the hall. We could sneak into the hall at any time, but there were dance classes and people rehearsing in the hallways. It was just full of life. And then we also lived there. Bill Cunningham was a person who was a photographer who happened to live there, and he would be walking in the hallways in his bathrobe because the bathroom was down the hall. So to me, music is home, and I don't have a great ear, but I've always felt that that's what it is, and that's what I'm hoping will be able to bring to Detroit in some way, that the liveliness of a building that is full of life and full of different kinds of life and different kinds of people is music to my soul. And if I were still living there, I'd be an even happier person than I am.
It's incredible, and I love kind of the way that you describe that and literally as a home. And I was wondering kind of as you think about that, there's obviously all types of things that relate to how music and sound and how people are traversing a space. I was wondering kind of in terms of how a space that you create relates to the community around it, right? So a lot of arts organizations talk about how they're engaging with their communities
Yeah.
and their various community engagement programs. Just kind of wondering, does that play a role in the architectural process, and how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, one of the ways we think about it is that we need to make sure that all of the parts feel like they're actually possibly made by different people. So, for example, in working at Geffen Hall, we have a wonderful cafe and a restaurant, I should say, and we found some that we appreciated as designers that were not the same as we were to actually design that, and then we helped to coordinate that work so it had a different feeling. In other words, you can't have a singular feeling because that becomes too monumental. It also becomes stale. So we need to have multiple feelings and multiple ways by which the building can feel like it's alive and changes. I think that's absolutely essential. Not only seems to be alive and changes, but is alive and changes. That's what's going to happen at the music hall. That's what it is beginning to happen at Geffen Hall, and that's what I hope for every music venue.
Absolutely awesome. And kind of one additional aspect to kind of how it's relating to community, and you talked about home. Are there, when you kind of again create these spaces separate from where someone will sit usually and experience, an artistic event, are you guiding them or trying to intentionally create spaces where they will congregate separate from that experience, or does that play a
Well, this is
role?
true in all the architecture we do. I mean, that is that there are I'll call it program spaces, the place you're supposed to be. I mean, to be specific, the seat you've got in the theater. And then there are the unprogrammed spaces, which are vestibules and so on. And I feel that these are the places where most interesting conversations occur and most activity occurs. Because if we're not conversing between two people, then we're only conversing with ourselves. And it's the space between us right now, Aaron, that is the conversation. That's where I grow to get to know you. You grow to get to know me. This is the creative space, is the place between two people and between two spaces. So everything is about that, in my opinion. I call that democratic space. It's not yours, not mine. It belongs to the other, whatever the other is. It could be
Wow.
the scent of food that we both smell in different ways. Could be the sound of music we both experience in different ways. It's the
Awesome.
difference. The difference is everything.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And especially just the thoughts of the intentionality about how that space is negotiated
Yeah.
between people. Absolutely amazing. So, of course, Music Hall here in Detroit is
Yeah.
having this massive expansion, and obviously you are leading those efforts. And just wondering your thoughts there. Are there any things that you feel or that are part of your process that are unique for Detroit that you feel this is unique? Obviously, for us as a city, this is
Yeah.
huge because it's, the biggest artistic, arts expansion, physical expansion, literally in decades.
Yeah.
And so this is huge for beyond music hall, but for the entirety of the city.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm pleased that the program that is going to happen in the music hall is alive and changing. Different things, recording studio, for example, performance spaces, food of different types, and the facade and the alleyway is a player. So I think it's kind of great that Detroit has these two really powerful ingredients, and bringing the alleyways to life is as important as the monumental streets that the city has. So it has both the grand and the intimate. And I think each of these has to change according to the season and, of course, according to the mood of the people. So that if there's a big game on, it's very, very different than when there's not a big game on. And I would say, I don't know when big games are not on in the city. What is it? Probably, well, in Detroit almost all the time. What the hell? But
Exactly,
at
exactly.
any
Lots.
rate, so there's always something going on in the city, and that's why Detroit's going to really be so sensational in the future.
Yeah,
And it is
absolutely.
now.
And so in thinking about, right, kind of the entirety, so one of the things I was thinking is the breadth of music halls, right, artistic experiences that
Yeah.
it creates across genres, et cetera,
Mhm.
and kind of this landmark historical aspect of Detroit as a music city, having emanated so many things around the world related to music. Does that history and or the breadth for music hall kind of embed itself in the creative process? Kind of curious how that worked. Can you give us a window into
Yeah.
your
Well, the existing music hall is, of course, 100 years old and is a very quiet building on the outside, with the exception of a big video screen and murals on it and music hall written across the top, but it doesn't tell you too much of what's going on inside. However, Vince and through the more recent lives of the music hall, we've got two or three things that are always going on inside. Well, the new addition will be both the same. It's virtually the same volume, and it's acting as a kind of couple. It would say the couple between, let's say, you and me. kind of different people, or Billie and me. It's very, very different. One of them is vibrant and alive and changes, and is full of pieces and is sort of showing itself to the outside. In both cases, I think there's a kind of an elegance to the building that says, hey, we're a substantial citizen, or we're both substantial citizens of the city of Detroit. So to me, it's the liveliness of the facade that I think is sort of an invention. A little comes after the way we worked on Geffen Hall and in Lincoln Center. That is, that it's the light changes, whether it's day or night, or whether we're actually changing the lights themselves. It's almost like the facade is an instrument itself, and it works in conjunction with what's going on inside. That is, if the music instrument store is open, or the cafe is open, or there's a performance, that we begin to feel that stuff.
Wow, I love that. And especially the reflecting in and literally people who are outside being able to more deeply connect with what's happening inside. And you kind of referenced this a little bit, and I was just kind of curious, do you view this work that you do you view the ultimate physical facade or structure as a kind of like, and as an artistic instrument? Do you kind of view it that way?
Hmm. Well, I don't think I never thought of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a, serving people. We're trying to solve problems, but I think that the instrument should be, in fact, be something that is played by whoever's in the building, and including, I'm sorry, the sun and the moon. I mean, the way light plays on something makes it come alive, and it's something I learned many, many years ago when I went to Rome and went into the Pantheon and realized, oh my God, this thing is 2,000 years old, and every day it turns is a magical instrument with the light that comes into it and the people that come into it.
Wow.
So
Wow. I love how you just captured that and described that. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all of my guests, right? This work that people do, especially as leaders in the creative spaces and in the arts, obviously it's incredibly rewarding work. But there are days where it seems like everything's going wrong, those types of things. And for so many of the leaders who are watching the show, I'm curious that for you, when you're in having those days or those experiences where it seems like there are obstacles that can't be overcome, et cetera, do you have any best practices or mechanisms that you use in your leadership that kind of get you through those toughest of
uh,
times?
um, that's a big one. Well, I don't know that I have time to answer it. I would say every day I awaken grateful, and I know the next day I'll be grateful. And I look back and think, wow, there was so much yesterday to be grateful for, even when it was difficult. So it's the new day.
Tod Williams, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much, literally, for everything that you are creating for our
Thank,
city of Detroit. And thank you for being on the show.
thank you for you. Bye.